Welcome back. I am Jeff Horseman with the Press Enterprise and PE.com, and you have just watched an hour-long candidate forum between the two men running to be Riverside's mayor, Ed Adkison and Rusty Bailey. And I am here with Alicia Robinson, who covers the city for us, and we've both been watching the debate and taking notes, and you're going to see a story in tomorrow's paper and online by Alicia, and we'll let her get to that in a bit. But first, Alicia, just want to get a sense of your initial thoughts about what both these candidates had to say.
Well, I guess they covered a lot of a wide variety of topics. It's some of the things that we've been hearing ever since leading up to the June election. As we mentioned in the pre-show, jobs and economic development, education, inclusiveness. So I think they covered kind of the major points.
Okay. In terms of what they had to say, do you think the candidates, did they hit any home runs? Did they make any major gaffes? I mean, you know, the history of politics is littered with one-liners or stellar performances or bad performances that have vaulted people into or out of office. Did that happen tonight?
Well, I don't know if it's anything for the history books, but I would say that initially Rusty seemed to be kind of dodging the question about whether there should have been public discussion of the benefits for the legislative aides, and his answer that, oh well, it might have slipped by him was not really entirely satisfying. It's true that the council doesn't have direct involvement in personnel matters, but you know, when your direct employee who works for you, their status is going to be changing, you know, you're probably potentially going to be aware of it. However, he did make kind of a good comeback when he pointed out the fact that those aid positions were actually created when Ed was on the council, although they did not initially have full city benefits at the time. And then Ed had kind of an interesting, thoughtful response on the question about prevailing wage. It kind of showed his business experience. Rusty's always well versed when he's talking about education. You know, that's his field. And then, you know, when Rusty brought up the issue of the city budget increasing while Ed was on the council, Ed used kind of the tried and true method of just disputing Rusty's numbers.
Okay, now we're starting to head toward the home stretch here for the November 6th runoff between these two men. I mean, if you had to look in your crystal ball, how do you see this playing out? I mean, they're going to kind of continue upon the things they built here tonight, or you know, what might we see happening in this race?
Well, other than some of the themes that we've mentioned, there really have not been any big, definitive, galvanizing issues that have attracted a lot of citywide attention. Now, as far as the campaign, Ed kind of initially seemed to take an early lead. He had started campaigning very early, but Rusty has picked up a lot of momentum recently. And you know, some of the people I talked to say that, you know, maybe he's fairly well positioned to win, but you know, neither one of them has some big sort of ace in the hole issue that they can sort of ride into office. And you know, November is going to be a whole different ballgame than the June election was, because so many more people are going to be voting. I think it could be either one of them. It's going to depend on who campaigns the hardest and knocks on the most doors.
All right, well, should be exciting. Well, Alicia, we know we have a story to write, so we'll let you go, but thank you so much for lending your insight. And folks, if you like what you heard, Alicia has her own blog on PE.com. She was on Twitter. She was actually tweeting this meeting tonight. And she's your go-to source for everything going on in the city of Riverside. So next we're going to have Gail Hammonds, who is the editorial page editor for the Press Enterprise. And we're going to ask her what she thought of this debate. So I guess here she comes. So hi, Gail.
Hi, Jeff. Nice
How you doing?
See you. Great.
Good. All right. So we'll ask you, I mean, what did you think about what you saw tonight? What are your initial impressions?
Well, I think that we saw a clear contrast between these two candidates, Jeff.
Okay. How so?
Well, I think just by what they stated in their opening remarks and the themes that they built upon throughout the debate, they're very distinctive. I mean, Rusty kept saying, we are better together in Riverside. And he kept emphasizing words like facilitator, collaboration, working together, building partnerships, leveraging partnerships. Whereas Ed, he came out and his quote was, I'm a trailblazer, that's what I do. And that was preceded by, if you don't want change, don't vote for me. So with Rusty, you're going to get a lot more of what we have, which is the facilitative approach of mayor leverage. With Ed, you're going to get someone who's going to come in and shake things up a little bit more. Okay. You know, more the CEO model versus the ambassador model.
Okay. And I mean, how well do you think each candidate did in terms of, I mean, like you said, there was a clear contrast, but do you think either their message is going to resonate more with the voters, and you think that, do you think one did a better job than the other of kind of communicating, this is why I'm the person to succeed, warm leverage?
I'm not sure if one did a better job than the other because the messages are so different. I think some will resonate with some voters and some with others. There's a little bit of an ideological underpinning to all of this. The collaboration, you hear a lot of that from President Obama. We're in this together. You didn't build that sort of thing. Ed's more the CEO. He's going to appeal more to the Mitt Romney cohort.
In terms of their policy, I mean, it seems like a wide variety of policy issues. Education, transparency in government, diversity. A lot of ground was covered here. Did any of the responses really stand out to you as, wow, that's really good point, or I'm not sure I really I'm not sure we really should have said that. I mean, did they surprise you in terms of anything they said on particular policy points?
Nothing surprised me. I was very disappointed in both candidates' response about the prevailing wage issue.
Okay.
Because we're talking, there was a lot of talk about fiscal responsibility, and fiscal responsibility does not entail upholding prevailing wages if you're not required to by law, because you're paying artificially high prices for construction projects, much higher than the private sector would pay for the equivalent project.
Okay. And what did you think about the questions they had to ask of each other? It seemed like they were trying to obviously, maybe it wasn't like going for the jugular, but they're trying to say, hey, maybe you had a little conflict there, or, the size of government kind of grew under your watch, and they had interesting responses, I thought, to each other's questions.
They did. I like that element to this debate because we didn't include that in the previous debate, as you know. So I thought it added a little more spontaneity to things, so it was good.
All right. Well, Gail, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and insight, and we will be right back after this break.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
Jackie Webster reporting for the Press Enterprise and PE.com. I'm here in
And we're back, and we're here with Tom Donahue of the Raincross Group, who, like our previous guests, watched the debates between Ed Adkison and Rusty Bailey for Riverside mayor. And so, Tom, what did you think about tonight's proceedings?
I thought it gave us an excellent glimpse and insight into the two directions that Riverside will go under the leadership as mayor from either Mr. Bailey or Mr. Adkison. I think it's early in the review process, but I encourage the viewers to go out there and educate them on their policies and procedures, to look at their websites and to really get to know them. Our passion as Raincross Group and other organizations that we partner with on voter education is to make sure that we have informed voters in the city of Riverside. So this is the first tip of the iceberg that we want the voters to really engage with in the purpose of the Rain Cross debates. And now is their job to do their homework and go into the next phase of their investigation of the candidates.
Okay. And I mean, I take it that takes on kind of a heightened importance after we've had a mayor who's been in office for 18 years, and a lot of people are familiar with him, and maybe people aren't as familiar with these two candidates, even though one has been on the council, one is on the council. And so, when people are doing that type of research, what are some of the questions they really need to ask that would help them make a decision?
I think they need to know what are going to be their priorities and what is their background that will enable them to accomplish those priorities. How will they work in a collaborative manner to achieve those goals? What is their focus and how will they get that done? Each of the candidates have records that they can stand on or fall on in certain areas. And I think that they need to provide that focus and leadership in the council, because the mayor sets the agenda for the council. And while he does not have a vote, by setting that agenda, they are an important leadership role to where Riverside is going to go in the future. And for us to evaluate them, we need to examine, number one, their record, two, what their goals are, and three, who do they surround themselves with? Who are their advisors? Who are the people that they look to for counsel? And I think when we see that strength of the team that they develop, that gives you another clue. And they all are just clues. It is incumbent upon the voter to actively seek information. And I appreciate what Press Enterprise and Charter and what Rain Cross and other organizations like the League of Women Voters do to provide nonpartisan information so that the voters can make the choice. We're not here as Rain Cross to say this should be your choice. We're here to encourage you to make an informed choice. Okay.
But having said that, in terms of both candidates' performance tonight, was there anything that really stood out for you in terms of strong points, weak points, in terms of communicating your message? Do you feel like they did a good job, or would you like to have heard more on a particular topic, or for them to elaborate on something they said?
I think in a minute and a half soundbite, it's tough to get into a lot of detail. I do encourage more information on the finances and economic development that we are looking into as a community. More specifics as we need to go out as what our economic development plan will be and how we're going to support what the city manager has put forth as an economic development plan. How we take a look at our vision for Riverside and seizing our destiny, and how do we activate that to become a program that will allow us to reach our vision of who we are as Riversiders. The one thing that the mayor brought to Riverside was a pride of who we are, that we're not a stepchild of Los Angeles or Orange County, that we can take charge of our own destiny. But we have to do that in a measured manner, where we have strong economic base, we engage our citizens through educational outreach, we engage the community to make sure that all voices are heard so that we can accomplish those goals.
Okay. But at the same time, how much can the mayor or city government do, and how much of this is beyond his control in terms of, what the state does has an effect here, what the national economy does has an effect here. I mean, how can the mayor, how can the city government be in a leadership role, when a lot of this stuff is, just beyond their control?
Well, I think that's the way it has been. And I think it's become very clear to a lot of people in Riverside and a lot of people in other communities that you can't allow the state, the federal government, to be in control of your entire destiny. That you have to put together a strategic plan to say, we can figure out how to make it work for our community and lessen our dependence on those types of financial incentives and fundings from state and federal. Now, you can't do that overnight. You can't do that in 1 year, maybe 2 years, and 3 years. But if you have a plan and you push that forward, there are ways that we can make those kind of things happen. We have the benefit here of our own public utility, and there's a lot of discussion about the funding and the transfer, but it is still an important economic incentive. It's a revenue incentive, and it's a revenue source for us that we can probably work to bring businesses here that we can achieve the tax base so that we're less dependent on outside revenue streams. And I think for the community of Riverside to engage into the next 150 years, we'll be approaching our 150th year as a community in 2020. How do we set as a goal for us to be financially less dependent on state and federal funding? And I think that should be one of the primary goals that a mayor would use to guide the people in city council and to bring the community along with that vision. Just like the mayor brought pride back, how will this mayor and future mayors bring us back to an economic independence to the Riverside area?
Okay. Well, Tom, thank you very much for your insight once again, and for helping to put this on. So appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. And next, we're going to talk to Brad Pomerantz, who is our moderator for this evening's forum. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
And so, I don't know how many of these types of things you've moderated before. I thought you did a fine job. You kept them on track. And,
I tried.
You kept the trains running on time. But what did you think as you were listening to these answers, just sizing up both these candidates?
Sure. So I moderated the debate in the primary when there were 7 candidates. And now tonight, I actually thought they both did quite well. I really did. I thought they both held their own. I thought they both had some highlights, but not a lot of lowlights. And in a lot of ways, it's an embarrassment of riches for the city of Riverside. There's no doubt that these two candidates would govern differently, but that doesn't mean that one necessarily is better than the other. They just are different. It's more stylistic, but they would govern very differently, I believe.
Okay. Talk about that. I mean, Gail Hammonds was on here earlier. She's talking about clear contrast between these two candidates. Did you kind of pick that up as well? And if so, what kind of contrast did you see between an Adkison-led Riverside and a Bailey-led Riverside?
In a lot of ways, I think it boils down to one of the questions I asked, which dealt with management experience versus non-management experience. I think Rusty Bailey has done a fine job in the city council, as has Mr. Adkison. I think Rusty would be a real cheerleader for the city in a similar way to Mr. Loveridge, but with a different approach. Mr. Loveridge was a cheerleader more as a technocrat, whereas Mr. Bailey, I mean, he's a high school professor. I mean, he really would be a tremendous cheerleader, whereas Mr. Adkison, I think, would work more as a technocrat. And I don't use that pejoratively in any way. I just think they have very different styles. It's youth. Again, not pejorative. It's experience, not necessarily a compliment, but they are two very different people.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I noticed that too. I mean, you had, Rusty, who's, he's right around my age,
right.
And he's at West Point graduate, and, high school teacher. You have Ed, who's, has grandchildren,
right.
Civil engineering and all that. So, yeah, certainly, two clear, two different backgrounds.
And what's interesting, I don't know that politically they're that different in terms of philosophy. I will say this, though. I thought there was one very interesting moment, and that was when I asked them about Proposition 30, which is the governor's tax initiative. I found it very interesting, even though it's a state issue, that Rusty Bailey took a position in support of Prop 30 and Mr. Adkison took a position in opposition to Proposition 30. In a lot of ways, the future of the state hinges on whether it passes or not. Stated another way, the state will go in one direction or the other. One is not necessarily better than the other, it's just a very different direction. So I do think in a lot of ways that is a clear distinction between the two candidates.
Okay. What did you think too about when it came time for them to ask their questions? I mean, I think you could tell about both in terms of the types of questions they asked and the types of answers they gave.
I actually enjoyed that moment very much. I think it added an element to the debate that we wouldn't necessarily see if it was just myself, just wah, 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 asking questions back and forth. It can get a little in the mud. I don't think it necessarily did in terms of the questions. I enjoyed it. I think I enjoy that format.
Okay. if you could go back, if there's anything you wish you could have asked them more, or had them, and you did a very good job of getting them to kind of answer the questions and everything, but if there's anything you wish you could have heard a little bit more about, or
Yes.
you felt they didn't really go in depth as they should, I mean, can you think of anything like that?
There is one question, and I discussed this in the primary debate, and that's the question of the status of the mayor and the status of city council members. We hinted at it, and that is, should they be paid a full-time wage? Look, this is a major city in the state of California. Over 300,000 people live in Riverside. It is the hub of the Inland Empire, especially in light of the fact of what happened with our friends in San Bernardino. You know, while many city councils are cutting salary of themselves, are turning themselves into part-timers or imposing term limits, is now the time to look another way. I mean, do we need full-time stewardship, both as the mayor and as the city council? It's something I've been talking about a lot on my program.
Okay, well, thank you very much again for moderating and for sharing your thoughts.
I appreciate it. You bet.
And now we're going to hear from my boss, Nels Johnson, the executive editor of the Press Enterprise. And thanks for joining me, sir.
Jeff,
And,
thanks for having me.
All right, and so you, like everyone else, you listened to the debate, and I'm wondering what your initial thoughts are now that it's done.
Well, it's quite a contrast to the primary debate where we had 7 candidates and it was kind of difficult to differentiate yourself from the crowd in some ways. But Rusty Bailey was much more polished and gave answers a lot more authoritatively than he did in the spring. But I think there's a pretty clear contrast between the two. You do have, I mean, just for example, Brad brought up the Prop 30 issue. Which was really interesting just to hear. You have Ed with a sort of running a business CEO perspective saying enough of the tax and spend, and then you have the other candidate, Rusty, who's a teacher and looking at it from a little different lens and saying, wait a minute, education's important, I'll support Prop 30. Now, Prop 30 is not a mayoral issue, but I think it gives you a little bit of a snapshot of the differences between the two candidates.
Okay. Did you think one did any better than the other in terms of conveying their message or pointing out maybe the the questions or the fallacies of the other candidates?
Well, I think they both did very well, and they were both very prepared. I think one thing that I was hoping to hear that I didn't hear from either was about the Latino vote. I mean, the Riverside has a very significant Latino population, and I don't think either candidate stepped up today and delivered something that would appeal to the Latino voters. So I think that's something that we should look forward to, and I will be covering that in the Press Enterprise over the next few weeks, but really I think there's an opportunity there for either candidate to step forward and say, I'm the candidate that would serve you best.
Okay. And what else about their positions interested you, or that, maybe surprised you, because they were asked a lot of questions on a variety of fronts?
Yeah, well, the prevailing wage question was kind of interesting, and also the, we want to keep business here. People give friendly answers and say, we want to hire Riverside companies, but that's not necessarily allowed by law to handpick those kind of bids that way. So, I guess the prevailing wage is one that surprised me a little bit. A lot of these, if you followed the campaign, that you heard answers that we've heard before from these two candidates. But I will say they were very impressive. They really answered. In the most part, they answered questions, and they spoke to themselves very well. You did get a good taste of Ed can be a little feisty, and Rusty wants everybody to get along. So I thought it was a really, I thought it was a great presentation. I thought Brad did a good job, and I thought it was really overall a really good evening.
Okay. Well, Nels, thank you very much, and appreciate it. And we want to thank you for watching tonight's debate between Ed Adkison and Rusty Bailey, who are running for mayor of the city of Riverside. We also want to thank the Raincross Group and Cal Baptist for helping us to put this on, and the production team as well. Be sure to check out the PE.com. We got reporter blogs from most reporters covering the cities. To tell you what's going on, we have a politics blog that I contribute to and my colleagues on the local and state and federal political happenings. And we have a daily political empire video hosted by Kim Pearsall, who does a great job with that. We're on Facebook. Most of the reporters have Twitter feeds. So we really want to be your go-to source for everything going on in the Inland Empire. So for the Press Enterprise and PE.com, I'm Jeff Horstman. Thank you for watching.